Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Touchdown Alabama. I'm Eli Walker, bringing you guys the first ever edition of the Rundown Podcast. This is a podcast that we had going for a little while, but we're super excited to now be joined up and teamed up with TDA and bring you guys the latest and best news when it comes to everything Alabama football. And to my left right here, we got Jalen.
Hey, how you guys doing? Name is Jalen Pearson. Really happy to be on this platform with you guys and to give you guys some great content.
Yeah, and of course, y'all probably have heard my name before. I'm Eli Walker. I've been with TDA for several years now. And then over to my right, we've got Destin.
Hey, it's Destin. I'm happy to be here joining Touchdown Alabama. Like Eli said, we've been recording this podcast we started 2 years ago and met these guys throughout high school. And so been talking football, sports, Alabama for a long time and happy to do it here.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, the first time we met, I think I met them out at the local courts and had to do them in a little bit playing basketball. And ever since then, they've we've just hit it off since then. So glad to. And like he said, we had a podcast for a few years that we had running up, and did really good with that. And now we're excited to get things going here with Touchdown Alabama. But first and foremost, I think it's something really interesting that a lot of people have gotten into, and I'm curious to get y'all's thoughts about. But there's been a lot of talk around Kalen DeBoer, right? After his first year, wrapping up his first season with Alabama after the Michigan game, and people are wondering: is Kalen on the hot seat? Is he still in a prime position to put himself in a position to be successful going into the second year? I think a lot of people are kind of wondering and asking that. So I was wanting to get y'all's take on where you feel Kalen DeBoer as a coach right now is after his first year with Alabama, and do y'all see him being on the hot seat like some of these Alabama fans on Twitter and Instagram are talking about, or do y'all feel like he's in a pretty good spot after year one?
I think he has another year to show what he can do, but I wouldn't say that it's a hot seat exactly, but I wouldn't say that he's sitting comfortable either. I think that Alabama fans hold their coaches to a certain standard that obviously Saban has set for the last 16, 15 years that he was there. And so, Alabama's not used to four loss seasons. So I wouldn't say it's a hot seat exactly, but I do think that, he needs to have a very successful second season and definitely make the playoff for sure.
Yeah, I don't think he's having he may not be on the hot seat, but if he has a repeat of this year, next year, then I don't think he'll be at Alabama anymore. Like Jalen said, Alabama standard is extremely high because of Nick, and so if we come in not being able to make a playoff with 12 teams, where with Nick Saban, I think we only missed it maybe 2 times in the 9 years that it existed. We're not going to have that here in Tuscaloosa. So some people would say he's in the hot seat, and I'm not mad because when you look at the team he did have coming into this year, I mean, there was a lot of talent there. Of course, we lost players to transfer portal, NIL, but he had a considerably talented team. And for them to not play up to the expectations we had, you cannot have a repeat of that. I don't think. I think if he has a repeat of that, then he will not be coming back to Alabama next year, the year after next.
Yeah, I mean, kind of to piggyback off of what y'all said. I mean, one thing about the Alabama fan base that's way different than any other fan base in college football is, especially coming off of Nick Saban's retirement. Alabama fans, they've been in this place for the last 20 years where we're competing. Alabama's competing for national championships year in and year out, and anything less of that has been considered a disappointment. So now Kalen comes in his first year, and then you go 9-4. I think that causes a lot of chaos within the fan base, just based off the simple fact that, like Destin said, Nick Saban every year basically that he was here at Alabama, he was either in a national championship or in the college football playoff. And now you miss out on that as a whole when the college football playoff gets tripled in size. So naturally that's going to, cause a lot of commotion within the fan base. And that's one thing about Alabama fans that's a lot different. They demand excellence year in and year out. Like when you look at every single team that has played in the last several years, it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter how many players you lost. There's still that same Alabama standard year in and year out. And I
True.
think that's one, it's kind of it's a blessing in disguise. It's got its pros and its cons. If you're Kalen DeBoer and you take that Bama job, yes, it's arguably the best job in the country to have. But the second that you start going downhill just a little bit, based on the fan base that Alabama has, that it causes a lot of people at times to overreact. So I don't think he's necessarily in the hot seat. But if you have another year like you had in year one, and also another year to bring in the players that you want to and to put in the system that you're used to having, and you don't make the playoff for a second consecutive year, then I think that's when the conversation turns and things get a lot more interesting. And that conversation has had a lot more, not only throughout the fan base, but with the athletic director, with Greg Byrne, and with everybody else associated with the football program.
Like, do you think because I put on the record, I think if he performs the same way this past year, he's gone. Period. Do y'all think that he can have the same type of performance and then have a third season at Alabama, or do you think that they'll get rid of him?
I think most likely they would get rid of him for all the stuff that we've already listed out. I mean, I think you do have to be more patient in the NIL situation that you have now. It's just talented guys are going to different places now. They're going to Oregon. They're going to different teams that they would have not normally went to. Alabama and Georgia's not getting all the top guys anymore. Either they're leaving for the NIL, more money in NIL deals, or they're getting out recruited by other teams. And so now you can't just say, hey, I can send you to the NFL. You got to try to fight for money against Texas and Texas A&M. So it's another whole factor that you might be doing your job really well. You might not get the guy that you would have normally got. So those elite Alabama defenses that we used to see, I don't know if we'll ever get back to that point where they just dominate. You're not going to recruit as well as you used to, or keep the guys. You might get a Caleb Downs for 1 year, and he goes somewhere else. So it's hard. It's going to be hard to build a team and to be consistently elite for 10 straight years when you're constantly competing for NIL guys year in and year out.
Yeah, I think if DeBoer has another year like year one, I think if you have that type of season in year two, that's way different than going 9-4 in year one. If you go 9-4 in year two and miss the playoff, then that's a whole different circumstance compared to stepping into a whole new situation like he did this past year and you miss out. That's understandable. Kirby Smart in his first year at Georgia went 8-5, but we see how things have turned out with him, and he's been able to make Georgia a contender year in and year out. So I think year two will be a lot more telling with the trajectory of Alabama football under Kalen DeBoer, and I think that'll give us a better read on what to expect moving forward in the future. But like you said, it's never ideal. Alabama fans expect to compete. Honestly, looking back on year one, if you really think about it, outside of that Oklahoma game, you handle Oklahoma, you're in the playoff. And a lot of us wouldn't even be having this conversation right now. So I'm going to give a little leeway. I'm going to show Kalen DeBoer a little lack when it comes to that side of things. But also, too, you go out against Oklahoma in a game that you're expected to win, that you're a clear favorite in, and you get beat by 3 touchdowns. And that can't continue. That's the part. Those are the type of games that you can't continue to see happen if you're Kalen DeBoer coaching at Alabama, because it's those type of results and it's those type of games that will make the fan base go in complete outrage mode.
Yeah, some people will argue, was this past year a failure? I think it's unarguable that it was disappointing. I don't think anybody had Alabama not making the playoff going into the season, especially with it being 12 teams. Oklahoma, like you said, was easily the worst loss of their season. But in him making the playoff would have covered up the struggles that Bama had this year, but losing to Vanderbilt was a pretty low point. I don't think anybody's seen that coming. Vanderbilt did have a little bit of a better team than they normally do, but I still think that loss was inexcusable, top down. Tennessee, they were ranked in the top 10. They made the playoff. Yeah. But I don't think they were an elite team all year either. They just happened to – the playoff's so big. I think that the playoff is so big now that I think that not every team that gets in is elite. And so I think Tennessee was one of those teams. And you've seen it when they got destroyed by Ohio State. Like, it wasn't even a competition. So it just feels like the standard at Alabama was lower this year, and it'll be interesting to see what happens first, whether Alabama fans will have to come together and readjust their future expectations, because I don't think anybody think that they'll be as dominant as they used to be. But no, it's going to be interesting. So
Yeah, and I think that's the real question is, do people need to be a little bit more understanding about the new times that we're in? Because like I said, you're not going to get these dominant teams, that you're not going to get the Joe Burrow LSU team. Those teams are not going to exist now. It's too much talent that's being dispersed out. So it's not, you're not all getting all American, like 7 All Americans on the defense. Like that's just not what it's going to be now. So I think fans are gonna have to temper their expectations some than what they used to, because winning 12, 13 games a year is gonna be tough.
Yeah, and I also think there's some positive to take away from this year too, because if you really look at it as well, if you look at it from this perspective, like, say Alabama makes the playoff as a 9-3 team. Let's just say hypothetically, the committee puts in Alabama over SMU. Does the team take a different approach going into next year, or do they think that they can still cut corners, lose some of these games that they're not supposed to, and then yet, hey, it's a 12-team playoff, we can still get in. So I think also too, looking back on this season as a whole, I think it could also be a blessing in disguise that Alabama didn't end up making the playoff, because now you got to go into the offseason and really reevaluate your weekly approach. And that's for not only the players, but for Coach DeBoer and the rest of his staff. So that might be a positive that they can take out of this year. Obviously you wouldn't have liked to have gone 9-4. That's a known fact all across the board from everybody associated with Alabama. But at the same time, there are some positives to build off of, and going into next year, maybe that can add some fire to the fuel for the rest of the players and even the coaches and the way that they go about a lot of these games. Because like y'all mentioned, during the regular season, 2 of the 3 games we lost were against teams that Alabama was 2 touchdown favorites in.
Yep. Well, a quote that I have really liked that Shannon Sharp has said is, never accept things in a win that you win in the loss. So yeah, even if you found a way to win 2 of those games, and it was a lot of stuff that was lacking, you still need to be on them just as hard as if they would have lost the game, because those things are just going to show later on in the season anyways.
Yeah, and it felt like a reoccurring thing from my perspective was Alabama would come into games and it would just seem unprepared, or not ready to play. When they entered that Vanderbilt game, you had an early turnover, and then the defense got behind, and they just could never adjust. In the Oklahoma game, where the offense, they could never make adjustments throughout the game. They started off slow, and then it just never corrected itself. So, and also the Michigan game, they had spurts in there where they played at a high level and they made some elite plays. But for the most part, when something was going wrong, there was never a adjustment or a correction there. So we'll see. We'll look on this next year. Hopefully we'll expect things to change. But
yeah, and I think, looking back on everything, that's one thing that I think a lot of Bama fans took for granted, were those games that Alabama came in as a favorite. I saw something in Saban's tenure from 2008 all the way up until he retired. I think he had some crazy record like 119-2 against non-ranked opponents. And then DeBoer steps in here in year 1, and you already have more losses than that just in 1 year with Kalen DeBoer. So that definitely is going to stir things up within the fan base. But I think ultimately, though, you had some positives this year. You had one of the best wins against Georgia. You did have some good games against LSU and Missouri. But, again, you don't want to lose those games that you're favored in. And, especially down here in the South, and the way these fans are, they'll pounce on you quick. When they smell blood, they're going to attack. It's like you're in a tank of sharks. So we'll see how things play out when it comes to that. But I think for the time being, I would say that DeBoer, I wouldn't say he's in the hot seat, but, I think there's definitely people there's going to be a lot of people that are going to pay a lot more closer attention to the team this upcoming season, now that we've seen everything that we have in year 1.
Oh, it's a rundown, yeah.